All right, welcome to the Explainer. So today we're doing something a bit different. We're treating this like a guided masterclass. We're going to unpack the actual mechanics of the broader economy, step by step. If you've ever watched the news and just felt like macroeconomic policy is this completely chaotic, unpredictable storm, well, you're definitely in the right place. We're going to take those massive, complex economic concepts and transform them into clear, structured, and easy-to-understand lessons.
Consider this our course syllabus. We're going to climb a pedagogical staircase today. We'll start with Level 1, the macro villains, then move to Level 2, where we unpack unemployment and the inflation illusion, and finally hit Level 3, looking at the policy playbook and playing politics.
Okay, let's start right at the foundation. Level 1, the macro villains. So in the grand narrative of the economy, high inflation and high unemployment are absolutely the ultimate adversaries. These are the twin forces policymakers are constantly battling, and as we'll see, fighting one usually means empowering the other. Let's look at unemployment first. The absolute biggest cost of unemployment is lost production. People who can't work simply don't produce, which shrinks the entire societal pie. The late economist Arthur Oken actually codified a famous rule for this, Oken's Law, which shows us the visceral, real-world stakes of joblessness. It basically states that for every one extra point of unemployment, the economy loses a staggering 2% of its GDP in lost output. Think about that. A standard recession can easily cost 3 to 5% of GDP. We're talking hundreds of billions of dollars lost, and obviously those costs fall disproportionately right on the shoulders of the individuals losing their jobs.
Now, this brings us to the agonizing dilemma that policymakers face. Because if you want to defeat the other villain, inflation, you have to pay a steep price. And that price is known as the sacrifice ratio. This ratio represents the percentage of economic output that literally has to be lost just to lower the inflation rate by one single point. Take the United States, for example. To drop inflation by just 1%, the economy has to sacrifice an estimated 2.39% of its output. There's just no way around it. Fighting inflation in the short run forces governments to tolerate higher unemployment and really painful reductions in overall production.
So while unemployment has this massive, totally measurable cost in lost output, inflation is just as widely hated by the general public. Look, when prices double, money literally stops being a useful medium of exchange. But even at lower single-digit levels, it creates massive anxiety for voters because it causes a steady, relentless erosion of your purchasing power over time. But to really understand the true costs of this particular villain, we kind of need to look a bit deeper into how it actually operates under the hood.
Which perfectly brings us to the intermediate section of our masterclass, Level 2, Unpacking Unemployment.
Let's peel back the layers here and examine the true anatomy of unemployment. It's not just some single monolithic number that the news throws at you. It's a highly dynamic, structured system, and there's a crucial distinction we have to make between the types of unemployment. First, frictional unemployment. This is actually the joblessness that exists when the economy is perfectly healthy and operating at full employment, right? It's just natural turnover. People searching for better fits, graduating college, moving to a new city. It's structural and honestly healthy. Cyclical unemployment, on the other hand, is the excess joblessness caused when economic output falls below that full employment level during a recession. That's the bad stuff.
To really wrap our heads around this, we need to stop viewing unemployment as a static group of people and start seeing it as a pool. People are constantly flowing in and out of it every single day. If you find yourself in this unemployment pool, there are essentially 3 ways out. Number 1, you get hired into a new job. Great. Number 2, you get recalled to your previous employer after a temporary layoff. Also great. Or number 3, you just stop looking altogether. And that last one, that is absolutely critical to understand. If you stop actively searching for work, you become what's called a discouraged worker. You leave the labor force entirely, which means you are no longer officially counted in the main unemployment rate at all.
And that leads directly to a formal definition you absolutely need to know: the natural rate of unemployment. Because of that healthy frictional turnover we were just talking about, the economy is literally never at 0% unemployment. The natural rate is basically the benchmark level of unemployment that exists even when the economy is running at full capacity. And it's not static. It fluctuates over time, driven by demographics, like, say, a huge wave of teenagers entering the job market, or by labor market structures, like the availability of unemployment benefits, which gives people the financial cushion to search a bit longer for a good job match.
All right, moving on to Level 2, the inflation illusion.
Let's pivot here and uncover the hidden and honestly often deeply misunderstood mechanics of our second villain, inflation. Because not all inflation is created equal. If an economy experiences a steady 5% inflation rate for a long time and everybody completely anticipates it, it's actually mostly harmless. Contracts, wages, interest rates, they all just automatically adjust to bake that 5% right in. The only real costs are minor nuisances, what economists call menu costs. Literally the cost of restaurants reprinting their menus or stores changing physical price tags. But unanticipated inflation, that is a massive risk. It causes a chaotic, totally unexpected redistribution of wealth across the entire society.
Seriously, when inflation strikes unexpectedly, there are massive winners and massive losers. Debtors, they win big time. Imagine you took out a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage back in 1963, and then inflation spiked massively in the 70s and 80s. You ended up repaying the bank in significantly cheaper dollars. It's an incredible deal for you. Conversely, creditors suffer terribly because the dollars they're getting paid back have way less purchasing power. And tragically, retirees who are living on fixed nominal pensions, they rapidly lose their ability to afford basic goods. They literally just sit there watching their life savings evaporate.
Now, to protect against this kind of disaster, some economies use something called indexation. This basically means tying the terms of contracts directly to the price level. Think of cost of living adjustments built into labor contracts. And while this totally protects individual people, governments generally hesitate to use indexation across the whole economy. Why? Well, because full indexation makes it so much harder for an economy to adjust to sudden shocks, like a massive spike in oil prices. If oil prices go up and indexed wages automatically go right up in response, it just feeds this endless, runaway inflationary spiral.
Now we're getting to the good stuff. Level 3, the policy playbook.
All right, you've mastered the basic and intermediate layers, so it is time to graduate to the advanced level of our masterclass. We're going to step right into the shoes of the central banks, think the Federal Reserve in the US, and look at the actual playbook they use to balance these massive macroeconomic forces. The central bank acts as the referee of the economy, and their primary whistle, so to speak, is the federal funds rate. They use monetary policy to shift aggregate demand. If unemployment is too high, they lower interest rates to make borrowing cheaper. This encourages businesses to invest and warms the economy up. But if inflation is raging out of control, they hit the brakes and raise interest rates to cool off an overheating economy.
Let's look at how this builds into an actual mathematical strategy. How do they know exactly how much to move the interest rate? They don't just guess. They rely on strict frameworks like the Taylor rule. It's essentially a three-step process. First, the central bank checks the current inflation gap against their target, which is usually sitting right around 2%. Second, they check the GDP gap, current output against the economy's full potential. And third, they adjust the nominal interest rate mathematically to restore balance between these dual mandates: control inflation on one hand, maximize employment on the other.
The absolutely crucial concept here is the principle of negative feedback. This idea beautifully summarizes the Taylor rule's core mechanism. Listen to this. If inflation goes up by 1 point, the central bank can't just raise interest rates by 1 point to match it, because that would leave the real interest rate totally unchanged. Instead, they have to raise the nominal interest rate by more than the inflation increase, say bumping it 1.5 points. They have to do that to actually increase the real cost of borrowing and effectively hit the brakes on the economy.
And that brings us to our final section, Level 3, Playing Politics.
Look, everything we just discussed, that is pristine mathematical economic theory. But for our final advanced concept today, we have to look at what happens when that clean theory collides head-on with the incredibly messy reality of human elections. Welcome to the world of political business cycle theory. This is an academic theory that studies the interactions between economic policy and plain old political survival. The hypothesis suggests that an incumbent administration might intentionally use really restrictive policies early in their term, basically enduring high unemployment and a painful recession to crush inflation early on so they can conveniently blame the resulting pain on the previous administration. Then, as their own re-election approaches, they suddenly push for massive economic expansion. The goal? To ensure a booming, low unemployment economy at the exact moment voters head to the polls.
And politicians care deeply about this because, quite frankly, voters judge economic pain very harshly. One way this pain is measured is through the misery index. It's an incredibly simple but potent metric. You literally just add the unemployment rate to the inflation rate. That's it. Research shows that incumbents traditionally fare very poorly in elections when this combined number is high, or even if it's just rising heading into election day. Voters worry immensely about both the overall level and the rate of change of our two macro villains.
Which leaves us with a totally fascinating reality to ponder. We know central banks, like the Federal Reserve, strive for absolute independence to avoid getting caught up in these political cycles. Yet, the pressure is always there in the background. So, I'll leave you with this final thought to wrap up our masterclass. Next time you're watching the news and you see the unemployment rate magically dropping and the economy suddenly booming right before a major election, ask yourself, is it pristine macroeconomic policy, adjusting perfectly to the Taylor rule, or is it just really, really good politics? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this helped demystify the incredible machinery driving our economy. Keep learning, and we'll see you next time.